Fala pessoal, tudo certo? Sejam todos muito bem-vindos e muito bem-vindas ao Block Insider, o seu podcast semanal aqui do BlockTrends, em que a gente fala sobre cripto, finanças e tecnologia. Meu nome é Nicolas Sacchi, eu sou o seu host, e como de costume a gente vai trazer um convidado super especial para conversar com vocês aqui sobre temas ligados a cripto, né, e formadores de opinião aí na indústria, líderes de mercado. A gente tem aqui com a gente também o nosso Head de Research e o maior analista on-chain do Brasil, que é o Cauê Oliveira. Cauê, prazer ter você aqui comigo mais uma vez. Seja bem-vindo.
Fala, pessoal. Eu que agradeço aqui novamente estar participando de um podcast aqui. Já aproveito para falar que, caso você ainda não é inscrito aqui do canal do BlockTrends, está perdendo, porque a gente está publicando bastante material aqui no canal, inclusive internacional, como esse que a gente vai fazer em inglês, tá? Mas não se preocupe, daqui a pouco a gente vai mudar para inglês e aí as legendas vão estar aparecendo para vocês e vocês vão conseguir acompanhar tudo, beleza?
Show de bola. E o nosso convidado aqui hoje é o CEO da Marathon, que é uma das maiores empresas de mineração de cripto listadas em bolsa lá nos Estados Unidos, né? O Fred Thiel, que é o nosso convidado, é uma das figuras que mais impulsiona a adoção de Bitcoin nos balanços da empresa no mercado americano. Então, para a gente, sem sombra de dúvidas, é uma honra ter ele aqui. E, naturalmente, como o Cauê falou, o convidado é estrangeiro, então a gente vai fazer, a partir de agora, a conversa em inglês, tá? Now, switching to English, Fred, we are delighted to have you here. Welcome to Block Insider Podcast.
Thank you. Obrigado.
It's a pleasure for us to bring such a personality here and a thought leader in this industry to the conversation and to talk a little bit more your experience with our audience. And before we begin, of course, I've done my homework and I dug a little bit about your professional history and some habits that you have. And the first I would like to talk about, so we can begin our conversation, is that you are fluent in several languages. Is that correct?
Yes. So my parents are Swedish. I was born in France, grew up in France, the US, England, Sweden, and then spent some time living in Venezuela. And so Spanish was added to it. And as you know, if you speak a couple of Romance languages, then you can understand pretty well. And same thing applies to the Nordic languages. So if you speak Swedish, you can understand some Danish and Norwegian. So,
Mm-hmm.
And then a few computer programming languages too along the way. So.
Okay, so why not Portuguese yet?
Well, I think it's a beautiful language. There's just not a lot of opportunity where I have been over the past years to speak it, other than Brazil and Portugal, obviously, and some parts of Africa where they still speak it. But it's a beautiful language. Matter of fact, I was just in Lisbon about a month ago, and spent a week in Cascais, outside of Lisbon, speaking at a conference, and it's absolutely beautiful. And
yeah, I'm living in Portugal as well.
You see, good. I've spent a little bit of time in Brazil, but mostly in Sao Paulo. I haven't had a chance to travel around the country that much, but it's a very dynamic and energetic country. So I think it's a great place for technology.
So, but how this multilingual ability influenced your learning process and adaptation to new technologies and the world of cryptocurrencies? Do you find that speaking multiple languages give you an advantage when navigating this global and dynamic market?
Well, I think speaking different languages forces you to have an understanding of the cultures of the people that you're talking with. There's a famous saying that is, if you can tell a joke in a foreign language, you really understand the culture. And I think every country and different regions of different countries have their own sense of humor. And one of the most important things in business is building relationships with people, because you have to build trust between people to do business successfully. Otherwise, the lawyers have way too much to do. And I think one of the biggest things about building trust is being able to be aware of the culture, understand it, and honor the culture of the country you're visiting. Whether it's traveling to Japan or whether it's traveling in Europe in different countries, or Latin America, the U.S. It's very important to really understand. There's this old expression, "When in Rome, do as the Romans do," and I think that if you can build bridges with people by connecting over cultural things, and really identify what are the similarities between different cultures and yourself and the people you're trying to do business with, it makes it much easier. And I've always found that there, in any relationship, when you build it, there's this period of you really like each other, and then there are periods where sometimes misunderstandings and miscommunications happen. And I think that's where it's really important to understand the culture of the people that you're working with, because there are certain things that can be offensive to different cultures that Americans just take for granted. One of the things being, Americans love to right away jump in and talk business, whereas in other cultures you have to first build the personal relationship and talk about anything but business, and whether that's over a meal when you're sharing a meal, or whether it's in a business meeting, there's always a different series of steps in building a relationship. And I think speaking different languages, understanding different cultures is just a critical piece of that.
And does this thought process of learning new languages helped you anyhow on the learning process for new technologies, or the thought process of teaching these new technologies to your potential clients?
I think the ability to break things down into simple chunks, if you would, is very important to be able to explain something and simplify it. And then you can get into the complexities of it. And language does play a very important role in that, because if you think about it, when you first learn a language, you learn how to say basic things like please and where is and how do I, and these basic phrases. Not unlike in Bitcoin, understanding, is Bitcoin something physical or not? The Bitcoin network versus Bitcoin, the currency. And over time, you develop more distinctions. You learn how all of the different ways of talking about the weather that exist in a language. Then it's kind of like all the different ways that Bitcoin can be used. And so like with any topic, at first you scratch the surface and you build some basic knowledge. And then as you get deeper and more aware of it, you get more skilled at understanding how to use it and how it can be used. And I think that's a very key similarity.
Amazing. And now joining more in the crypto side of the conversation, how were you introduced to the world of cryptocurrencies and blockchain? What motivated you to do the transition to this industry?
So I've been in technology for 40 years and started my first job in the technology industry was actually writing software for a bank in London. And so I've been involved in the fintech industry on and off over the years, but also every aspect of technology, semiconductors, internet, data communications, et cetera. And I've always been very curious. There was a technology developed, really a fintech system developed in Kenya back in the early 2000s called M-Pesa. So the letter M and then Pesa, P-E-S-A. And in the Kenyan dialects, Pesa means money, and M came from mobile. And what it was essentially using cellular telephone points or credits to do commerce. So real digital currency, essentially. And what it enabled people to do is it enabled farmers, for example, in parts of Kenya to buy and sell goats without having to have bank accounts and do things. And so that was 2007 is when that started. And today there are tens of millions of people in Kenya, and it's used in over 10 countries in Africa. And so I had read about that. And then also a little bit further along, once Bitcoin had launched, a former colleague of mine had gotten involved in it and said, this is something you should really look at. And I approached Bitcoin first from a perspective of, this is a financial instrument that people are investing in. and it's difficult to trade. So how could I remove the friction from the process of trading? And so I set about to develop a technology and a platform that would enable people to trade across exchanges globally without the friction of having to move money around, because that was a big pain point in the industry this is back 2015, 2016. And obviously very difficult to get licensing to be able to do that. Eventually set up a business in Liechtenstein because as a European country, it was a member of the EU, but it also did not have very strong crypto or any real regulation around crypto at all, or securities trading, because they didn't have any stock exchanges in Liechtenstein. And so we were able to get crypto, meaning Bitcoin and Ethereum, treated as foreign currencies from a trading perspective, not legal tender, but from a trading perspective. And so we were able to start trading those currencies in Liechtenstein. Eventually, the financial regulators realized that because the business involved taking and holding deposits from customers, you really needed a banking license, and so it didn't make sense for us to continue the business there. But that gave me a very deep exposure to Bitcoin as an asset class and why people wanted to hold Bitcoin, both in the developed world and the developing world. So in the developing world, Bitcoin operates very much kind of like M-Pesa does in Kenya. The difference is, and I know many people in Latin America experience it this way, especially in Argentina, for example, when you have a government whose economic policies make the currency fluctuate a lot and create high inflation, you need to be able to store your wealth in something that will hold its value. Traditionally, that's been in dollars. The problem is, like in Latin America, it's very hard for some people to get bank accounts, and it's hard for them to hold dollars, buy dollars and hold them, other than doing it in the kind of off-market areas. And so Bitcoin provides a great service for people like that. And then in the developed world, of course, it's an asset class that people invest in, and being a finite asset, meaning there'll only ever be 21 million Bitcoin, it provides an asset which should over time appreciate considerably as fiat currencies lose value. And so I felt that this was really something that was worth continuing to work in. Coincidentally, a good friend of mine was asked to take a company called Marathon Patent Group and have it start mining Bitcoin. And so I was asked to join the board in early 2018 as this process of transition from a patent company to a potential Bitcoin miner was started. And then in 2021, I stepped in as CEO, and the rest is kind of history.
That's interesting how the geographic place that you live can influence how you understand Bitcoin and this whole industry, right? Because the people have the history of hyperinflation process in their country, have more open mind to understand how a money or digital asset can be used in different ways, not just to transfer money over places, but to store value actually. But moving into your experience in Marathon, what have been the main challenges and opportunities you've encountered while leading Marathon Digital Holdings to become one of the largest Bitcoin mining operation that we have today, and not only in North America but in the whole world?
So I think it's maybe the sum of my experiences over the 40 years that I've worked in technology. I also did a little bit of a detour into private equity for a handful of years, and spent some time with some of the smartest people in that industry, really learning about mergers and acquisitions and how to create value for owners. At the end of the day, my mission, my role in leading Marathon is to create value for our shareholders and create value for all our stakeholders, which include our employees, the communities where we operate, and the various partners that we work with around the world. And the core challenges in Bitcoin mining are really three things. You have to have access to capital. You have to have access to compute, meaning the equipment you use for mining Bitcoin. And then you have to have access to capacity, which is power, and a place to plug those miners in. And over the years, those constraint points change, meaning capital may be very easy, but capacity may be very constrained, or compute may be very constrained. And so this is a business where you have to be able to be very agile and move quickly. And so when we started, if you go back to 2021, when I took over as CEO, we had 5 employees. So it was a very nascent business, very early in our development. And what we determined was that the most important thing for us to do was to grow and invest in what we felt were the assets that would generate the best return, which are the miners. So not invest in owning sites, but just mining rigs. Because if you have $100 to invest, and if you're going to own a site, you have to spend $30 on the site and then $70 on the miners, you'll grow slower than somebody who is just investing $100 in miners. And at the time, there were lots of sites that had capacity. People had built a lot of sites. And so we focused very early on and growing very quickly by deploying miners at other people's sites. And then as capacity started becoming more constrained and power started becoming more important at the end of last year, we started shifting our focus to buying sites and owning sites. And we've been able to do that at a lower cost than it would have cost us to build them originally. So better value created for our shareholders. And so we've been able to grow the organization and our capacity to now we control about 1.1 gigawatts of power around the world. We operate on 3 continents and 11 sites. And we're also doing new types of things like generating Bitcoin using the gas from landfills. We're heating 11,000 homes in Finland with the heat from our Bitcoin miners. We're starting to look at the environmental things that we can touch and help solve problems around. And the interesting thing is Bitcoin mining does a number of things. One, at large scale, or what we call utility scale, you work with the power generators to help them monetize energy that they otherwise can't sell. And at the same time, you allow them to balance their grids. So electricity demand goes up and down all day long like this, and power generation has to match it, because if it doesn't, your electrical grid blows up, your transformers explode, and things like that happen. And so most utilities have what's called baseload generation. This is coal power or nuclear power, it could be hydroelectric power, which is more common in Brazil, for example. You have a lot of hydroelectric energy. And so that's a constant amount of energy, but you need to regulate how much energy is going into the grid. And so there's either a lot of energy that doesn't get sold into the grid because the grid doesn't need it, or there are times of the day where you have to turn on extra energy, which is very expensive to turn on. It could be natural gas or other fossil fuel driven plants. And so Bitcoin miners have this unique ability that they can shut off their systems in just a few minutes and give that energy back to the grid. And then when the grid doesn't need it, you can consume it again. And so if you look in Paraguay, for example, where we have an operation, we operate on a dam, the Itapu Dam, which is right on the border between Paraguay and Brazil. And Paraguay has more power coming off that dam than they can use. And so a lot of that is sold back to Brazil. But they also have excess energy, which they can't sell. And so instead of them not being able to sell that energy, we can go there and we can buy that energy to help them afford to operate their systems. So that's at kind of utility scale. In the energy harvesting world, this is where we take true energy that otherwise can't be used. It could be methane gas coming from what we call landfills in the US, but trash dumps. In many parts of the developed world, you have to collect the gas that comes out of these trash dumps and either flare it, meaning you burn it because it's methane gas, it's very bad for the environment, or you put it into a pipeline and convert it into a form of natural gas. And so we sit on some landfills and burn that gas. And we're now starting to focus much more on this energy harvesting business. The other thing is that industry, about 50% of the energy used by industry is used for heating things. And of that, about 14% is what's called low-grade heat. So things that are sort of 50 degrees centigrade or less in heat. And so Bitcoin miners generate lots of heat. So we're able to capture the heat from the Bitcoin miners and feed that heat back into an industrial process. So for example, when you make ethanol or methanol, which is made out of corn, you take the corn, you process it with heat, you generate ethanol, and now you have a waste product, which is this wasted corn. We can take that corn, put it into an anaerobic digester, which essentially uses bacteria to create methane gas, digest it. We then use that methane to convert it into electricity. We use electricity to mine Bitcoin, and the heat from our miners can go back into that ethanol production process. So the company doesn't have to buy electricity to heat the corn product. And so we save them from having to get rid of the corn product in the first place, and then we save them from having to buy electricity for heat, and they pay us for that. And so that allows us to mine Bitcoin at a lower cost, but we're generating electricity and generating heat and feeding it back. So it's a true circular kind of system. And there are lots of other ways we can do things like that.
And also helping to use the byproduct of another process to generate energy, right? Yeah, you gave us so many hooks here. It's hard to pick one.
Let me take a question here. Okay, I will be quick. I was thinking about the thing about the industry itself. I mean, like today we have Bitcoin mining as an independent industry. Like we have Bitcoin miners and all the kinds of material miners, and in the energy sector, there are different parts of this. But do you see in the future that we can gradually integrate the energy sector into the Bitcoin mining? Like every energy producer today could potentially become a Bitcoin miner, right?
Yes, absolutely. And the AI industry is really forcing a lot of that as well, because if you think that the Bitcoin mining industry uses a lot of energy, just look at AI and you'll see an industry that will likely use 10 times the energy. And the AI industry has a different need for energy. They need energy that never shuts off. Whereas, as I said earlier, Bitcoin miners can shut off their systems and are more flexible load. But that means there's a very big synergy between the two, because over time, AI is going to need a flexible counterpart who can ramp up and down electrical consumption as AI electrical consumption goes up and down. And so there is a professor at NYU, New York University, called Scott Galloway. He's quite a prolific speaker. And he did a podcast a few months ago where he talked about in the 1970s and 80s, the energy companies were the most valuable companies on the stock market. And then the technology companies came along and the technology became the most valuable companies on the stock market. And now we're entering a world where energy and technology have to come together. And so this is where I think, to your point, you're starting to see energy companies really wake up to this. And I gave a presentation at Mining Disrupt, which is a Bitcoin mining industry conference in Miami 3 years ago. And I said that you have to partner with power utilities or else you'll be out of business in the long run. And that's clearly being shown today as truth. And so I think this industry is going to morph more and more into energy synergistic businesses. We really see ourselves as supporting the energy transition. I think over time, you're going to see us focus more on developing data center sites where you can have a mix of Bitcoin mining and AI processing connected to some form of renewable energy. So that'll be solar, wind, hydro, geothermal, or possibly even atomic in some nuclear in some cases. But as I look around the world, and this is one of the reasons we did our recent agreement with the government of Kenya, is there are lots of developing countries that have huge amounts of energy that's underutilized. I mean, just look in Brazil, the big challenge is not generating energy, it's getting the energy to the people who want to consume it, right? The population centers, right? And the population centers in Brazil tend to be closer to the coast, but the energy generation tends to be closer to the mountains.
Yeah, the distribution problem.
Right, it's the distribution problem, and Bitcoin solves for that, and AI can solve for that, because we can build data centers where the energy is generated, monetize the energy, turn it into something valuable, and then over time, as these transmission grid connections get built, we can move away and go other places. So we think that we are a huge enabler for the energy transition, and that's really what we're focused on as a company, is helping the world transition from traditional energy hub and spoke models to new energy models.
By implementing Bitcoin as a energy arbitrager, right?
Yep, exactly.
Kind of. So one thing that you mentioned in the beginning of our conversation is that you have had the opportunity to work with Bitcoin trading as well in the beginning of your career in the blockchain and crypto markets, and you transitioned to the mining sector. And of course, we always bring to our audience that those are two very different industries on its particularities. And they have, I mean, on the trading side, you look at indicators, prices, patterns, flows, and stuff like that to see the best entry and exit point. And in the mining industry, it's more pure technology. You look at microprocessors, you look at energy consumption and stuff like that. But they also have connections, right? So I would love to hear, on your point of view, which are those connections that every crypto trader should be looking at to make sure they are making the right decisions?
Yeah, so Bitcoin is a unique asset in that every day, roughly 450 Bitcoin are coming into the marketplace. Newly minted Bitcoin, if you would, and these come in the form of a block subsidy that the miners get. Now, miners can choose to hold that Bitcoin or they can choose to sell it. It's totally up to them. So in our particular case, we tend to hold the majority of the Bitcoin that we mine, and this is one of the reasons why we have over $1 billion in Bitcoin on our balance sheet. We're one of the largest holders of Bitcoin of public companies in the United States. Because we believe that the value of Bitcoin over time will go up, as it has. Over the past 13 years, Bitcoin has averaged about 150% per year. Some years more, some years less. But the average is about 150% annual return. And so it makes sense to hold Bitcoin for the long term. Now, that being said, trading Bitcoin, you're constantly looking for supply and demand flows in the marketplace. But traders know that there could be 450 new Bitcoin coming to the marketplace, which is less than 1% of the market cap. So it's obviously not going to have a huge impact on liquidity. And then there are large holders of Bitcoin. 70+% of Bitcoin is in wallets that haven't moved in 6 months, and over 50% haven't moved in over a year. And now you're starting to see things like the Mt. Gox Bitcoin, after almost 10 years, is finally being released back to the holders or the claimants who have claims on Mt. Gox. That Bitcoin could come into the marketplace, or it might not. People might just decide to sit on it. You saw the ETFs that were started at the beginning of this year in the US, and Grayscale, which was one of the biggest trusts at the time, that had a huge amount of Bitcoin, saw money flow out of it when it started trading and into other ETFs. But net ETF flows have been on the uptick. And clearly there are days where things are down and up. But there are two aspects of trading for Bitcoin miners that are important. One is do you hold your Bitcoin? Do you sell it? Some miners have actual Bitcoin or digital asset trading operations, such as we have that, where there are times where we'll go into the market and buy Bitcoin ourselves with cash because we think there are opportune price points. And there are times where we may sell to generate some quick liquidity. But we also do that with power, right? Energy for us is something we have to trade as well. And so by trading energy, it helps us lower our overall cost of power. And so, trading is a core part of what we do as a business. We trade Bitcoin, we trade power, and operations and efficiency is a core competence that we have to have as a Bitcoin miner. Obviously, managing uptime, managing our cost of energy, and what it costs us to produce a Bitcoin. And so there are a lot of core competencies that in Bitcoin mining that come from financial industry. How do you raise capital? It's a very capital intensive business. I mean, we invest billions of dollars a year to build our infrastructure and grow our company. And remember, every 4 years, there's a halving. And that means that every 4 years, the Bitcoin that we earn drops by 50%. And so, we're constantly chasing efficiency. So more efficient microprocessors, more efficient or ASICs, more efficient energy, more efficient operations. And so we believe you have to be a technology company, you have to be a trading company, you have to be an operations company, and you have to be a company that can work with other governments. And this is really important because when you, whether you're working in the state of Texas or whether you're working in Kenya or whether you're working in the United Arab Emirates, all locations that we operate in, you have to have really good relationships with the local governments. And that's the communities, the state, at the federal level. And in the US, we've now seen, the Republican candidate for President, Trump, opening up and being very positive about Bitcoin, whereas the Biden administration has historically been very negative about Bitcoin. And in the US, there are 55 million voters, and that's a good portion of the population who actually like Bitcoin and crypto. And so it's an important block of voters. But if you look outside the US and you look at UAE, for example, the sovereign, the rulers of UAE, wanted to be in Bitcoin mining because they believe Bitcoin could be an interesting asset for them to hold. And if they're going to hold that asset, they need to make sure they can operate with that asset, which means they have to have Bitcoin mining. And so we partnered with the sovereign in UAE to build, one of the largest data centers for Bitcoin mining in that part of the world. Same reason that Kenya wants to partner with us. It's help monetize their energy that's not being utilized and help them really develop the capacity for holding and using Bitcoin. And that's what we're doing with countries all over the world.
Amazing. You spoke a lot about mining efficiency with Bitcoin. And I believe Marathon Digital Holdings is investing a lot on new technologies to guarantee you are on the forefront of this industry. Can you tell us a little bit more about the latest innovations you are implementing on the Marathon side?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've spent a lot of time focusing not just on the software side of it, but on the hardware. By that, I mean the infrastructure. So we have developed a product line we call 2PIC, which stands for two-phase immersion technology. So Bitcoin miners essentially take electricity and generate a lot of heat when they operate. And traditionally, you used airflow to cool them. Think of it as a fan blowing air across the chips. But as the miners get more and more powerful, using air stops becoming practical. And you have to go to liquid immersion, where you literally put the miners into a liquid, or you do liquid cooling, which is, think of it as you're pushing water. You have plumbing in the miner that essentially runs water across a cooling plate that is attached to the ASICs that can take the heat away, a bit like how a car radiator works. The problem with that is if you get a leak, your miner short circuits. In immersion mining, you're putting the miner into a liquid that doesn't short circuit. It's a type of oil that is very safe, but it allows the miner to essentially be cooled by sitting in this bath. It's kind of like you jumping into a pool. But that can only cool miners up to a certain point. And so the next step is what's called two-phase immersion. And that's where the liquid boils. Literally, you're letting your miners boil this liquid. And when that liquid changes from liquid to vapor, it takes away 6 times the amount of energy. in just 2 degrees centigrade of difference of temperature. So if you were to put a thermometer into a liquid water and boil it, it will never get above 100 degrees centigrade. But the vapor, the steam, can continue to get hotter and hotter and hotter. But the water will never get hotter than 100 degrees centigrade. And so if you can capture that steam, that vapor, it is very hot. And so you take that vapor, you condense it in a condenser, which is a bit like how when you make alcohol, when you make cachaça, for example, in Brazil,
like a distillery,
you
right?
Still. Yeah, exactly. And so you take that vapor and you put it into a condenser, and then it turns back into liquid. And when it does that, it gives up that heat. And so you can heat water to very high temperatures that way, or you can heat something else to very high temperatures. So that technology allows us to run a much denser amount of miners. So we can run 2 to 3 times the amount of miners in the same physical space as you can in single phase immersion. And on top of that, it allows us to really build very robust systems, because when the miners operate at a consistent temperature, they don't break as easily. And so they last much longer. And it doesn't matter what the temperature is outside. If you look at the miners we have running in the UAE, the average temperature outside is over 50 degrees centigrade in the air. And then it's 95% humidity. You can't run air-cooled miners like that. And so our miners in UAE run perfectly. And so we believe that if you use 2-phase immersion, you can also do something else very unique, which is you can overclock the miners, meaning you can run them at a much higher speed than they typically would, because you can keep them cool. And what that means is you can buy less miners than you normally would need, and you can run them at a higher speed. And then if for whatever reason you need to use less energy, or the energy prices go up all of a sudden, you can run them at a lower speed and make them even more efficient. And so it gives you huge amounts of flexibility. And so we believe that not only is this good for Bitcoin mining, but the AI industry needs the exact same technology. All of these new AI systems that NVIDIA is coming out with are getting more and more power dense, meaning you're packing more watts of energy into a smaller physical space, which means it's harder and harder to remove the heat, which means you have to move to liquid immersion from liquid cooling. And that means that you have to go to kind of 2-phase immersion. And so we're very actively engaging with the AI hardware developers to develop our systems so you can use them either for Bitcoin mining or for AI. And that means that now when you invest in the infrastructure, the data center, you can use a data center for Bitcoin mining, or you can use it for AI. And that gives a lot of flexibility to data center operators.
Yeah, this is amazing because it pushes the infrastructure forward, not only for crypto, but for technology as a whole, right?
Exactly.
Amazing.
Yeah, we are closing to the end of our podcast, and I would like to return a few points that we mentioned before about the Bitcoin trading, mostly because I've been watching a little bit of the mining revenues in the few weeks, and I've seen a lot of stress in the Bitcoin mining industry because of the halving and because of the reduced network fees that we have today. And you guys recently announced that you guys are exploring the mine of Caspa, right? This new revenue stream is something about this market stress. Is what motivate this decision? What are the expectations of the impact of Caspa mining in marathon business in your revenue stream?
Sure, great question. So many people say, why would you ever want to mine something other than Bitcoin? Well, we have shareholders, we have employees, and we have partners, and we need to constantly look at what is the best for them. How do we generate the best return for the capital we have? And so we will always experiment with doing new things. The reason we are developing technologies is because we experimented and found that it worked and it made our systems more efficient. And so we then turned that into a business. We started mining Caspa last year as an experiment, and we started seeing that, there's a large enough marketplace potentially that would make sense for us to put a small amount of our capacity to this. And today we're using less than 1% of the energy that we use for Kaspa mining. It's still a small business, but Kaspa has moved up very quickly in value from when we started mining it. We are now expanding our capacity for mining Kaspa. It's a very profitable coin to mine, and realize that if I can mine Kaspa at 80+% margin, I can sell that Kaspa and buy Bitcoin, or I can decide to keep the Kaspa, and I can do what's best for my shareholders. And so while there are people that criticize us because, oh, we're doing something other than mining Bitcoin, at the end of the day, we're a company that has to respond to our shareholders. And there are things that we're going to do to explore around the blending of digital asset compute and energy. And that's really what our focus is. It's how do you better utilize energy to do things like digital asset compute, and how can you monetize digital asset compute better? Does that mean that we think that Kaspa is a better technology than Bitcoin? No, not necessarily.
Going to the moon.
Yeah. I mean, do we think that that there are reasons for people to not mine Bitcoin and mine Kaspa? No, please, we don't want anybody else mining Kaspa because it's a very profitable business for us.
Bitcoin miners in home mining are using this exactly setup. They are mining Kaspa and then buying Bitcoin with the Kaspa coin. I've been talking with a few Bitcoin miners in Brazil, and for home mining isn't too much profitable because the industry is too much big.
Yep.
There's guys like Marathon that hold a lot of terahash, and we can compete. But with Kaspa, there's an opportunity for these guys.
Yep. Yeah. Exactly.
Fred, I know you are a busy guy, and I would like to do just one more question, if you allow me. Okay. So the question is very simple, actually. What's next for Marathon Digital? What do you plan for the next 5 years, and how do you pretend to position the company to capitalize on new opportunities?
I think we've said it pretty clearly. We expect by 2028, which is 4 years from now, that 50% of our revenues will come from outside of the US. We'll continue to grow and expand internationally. Latin America is a big opportunity for us. Africa, we think, is a big opportunity for us. Asia has lots of opportunity, the Gulf region, the Middle East, and also Europe. Does that mean we're going to necessarily be mining Bitcoin in all those places? No, but we will be operating digital asset compute at some level, and we will be providing our technology into those markets. The other thing we said is that 50% of our revenues will come from things other than mining Bitcoin. And so we are looking to become a very diversified company. We're looking to be a generator of energy. We're looking to be a developer of technologies, and we're looking to work with energy companies at balancing the grid. And we think that long-term, that's the best business for a Bitcoin miner to be in. If you just stick to pure Bitcoin mining, there comes a point in time where the energy prices don't support mining Bitcoin. If you're just doing traditional Bitcoin mining, to your points about people mining Kaspa to buy Bitcoin, it's a much better business to do. That makes a lot of sense, I think, and people will find other ways of doing things to acquire and hold Bitcoin. And then the only people who will remain long-term mining Bitcoin are the people who have almost zero cost of energy. And the only way to have zero cost of energy to mine Bitcoin is to be doing other things that pay for the energy.
And be connected to the energy producers as well.
Or be an energy producer.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Sure, yeah.
Exactly.
So thank you very much for your insights. I think you shared with us invaluable insights and experiences. It's been fascinating to hear about the innovative projects and strategic approaches at Marathon Digital Holdings. We appreciate you taking your time to join us at Block Insider. If you have any closing remarks you would like to make, please be our guest. If not, we end by now.
Well, I just thank you very much for the opportunity to speak with you and your listeners. I hope they get something good out of it. And, you know, I think Brazil is a great location to leverage all of the benefits of Bitcoin, not just the digital asset itself, its ability to be a store of value, but also, I think, better monetize the energy that's underutilized in the country. And I think we certainly look forward to partnering with people in Brazil who want to work with us in that area, and feel free to reach out to us and we'd be happy to talk.
And now, Fred, I will switch back to Portuguese to make my final remarks, if that's okay. Pessoal, então, agradecer aí, né, a participação do Fred. Como vocês podem ver, é uma pessoa que entende muito dessa frente de mineração, nos ajudou bastante a entender das inovações que estão acontecendo nesse setor e como isso pode impactar a indústria, né, de cripto como um todo, pode mover preço também, e isso, no final das contas, pode impactar no seu bolso. A gente sempre tenta trazer aqui os líderes de pensamento dessa indústria, e sem sombra de dúvidas, o Fred e a Marathon fazem parte dessa liderança. Então, espero que vocês tenham feito bom proveito. Se você gostou desse conteúdo, já amassa esse botão de like aí para ser sempre impactado por conteúdos que a gente produz. Não se esquece de se inscrever no canal, ativar o sininho de notificação para receber sempre os conteúdos em primeira mão. E acho que é isso, né, Cauê? Algum outro ponto aí que você gostaria de trazer para a gente encerrar?
Só lembrando que lá no BlockTrends Pro a gente também fala de mineração e também explica bastante sobre como esse setor funciona, através de, inclusive, de análise on-chain. A gente consegue rastrear também como os mineradores estão interagindo com exchanges, com o balcão JTC, e muito daquilo que a gente fala acaba também derivando no preço, tá? Então, se você quiser conhecer um pouco mais, tem um QR Code bem aqui no canto da tela, ou no primeiro link da descrição, é onde está a nossa plataforma completa, que é o blocktrends.app, e lá você vai ter acesso a todos os materiais, além do que a gente publica aqui no YouTube também. Valeu?
Valeu, pessoal. Então a gente vai ficando por aqui e se fala de novo na semana que vem. Um abraço, tchau.
Bye, bye.
Tchau.